Messages from our sponsors.
Along the river's edge, there's a special place where concrete gives way to water and trails. A place for nurturing and healing, where advanced medicine and compassionate people come together. Introducing the new Northern Light Mercy Hospital, offering more services in one convenient location and the same care we started with, that's accessible to all. Because Maine made us devoted to the health of our entire community.
The Portland area's trusted choice for senior living, Stroudwater Lodge, gives Maine seniors independence and families peace of mind. Residents enjoy chef-prepared meals, unique programming like beer brewing or classes led by local artists, along with all the maintenance-free benefits of community living. With their sister community, Avita, specializing in memory care on the same campus, Maine families have a wide variety of care options in a beautiful wooded setting, yet minutes from downtown Portland. To learn more, visit stroudwaterlodge.com. Welcome to Maine Voice.
Good evening and welcome to Maine Voices Live. I'm Steve Greenlee, editor of the Portland Press Herald. Tonight we'll get to know Tara Jensen, author of A Baker's Year and the recently published Flower Power. She grew up in Naples, Maine, attended Lake Region High School, and graduated from College of the Atlantic. She has baked professionally for over 20 years and now hosts workshops for home bakers. She'll be interviewed this evening by Press Herald food editor Peggy Grudinsky. We'd like again to thank our generous sponsors who make this series possible: Stroudwater Lodge, Hub Furniture, and our presenting sponsor, Northern Light Health. Please welcome to our virtual stage, Tara and Peggy. We hope you enjoy the show.
Oh, Peggy, you're muted, sorry.
Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for coming.
Yes, thank you for coming. I'm Peggy Grudinsky. Tara is obviously there in her kitchen. And I'm especially excited to have her here because I'm a very avid baker myself. And I've just begun, like maybe many of you during the pandemic, to dip my toe into sourdough. I still feel like I could be doing it every day for the next 100 years and still not really quite understand it. But that makes me personally super excited to have Tara here. I thought that maybe we would start by just having a bit of an icebreaker, maybe some goofy questions. And Tara, maybe they'll help us get to know you a little bit better, more informally than Steve Greenlee's introduction. So I wondered, I'm going to maybe ask you a few things and ask you which one you would pick and why. So the first one, Naples, Florida, Naples, Italy, Naples, Maine.
Oh, gosh. I mean, I'm just going to go with Naples, Italy, I think is going to be my answer. But I'm just on a pizza kick right now, and I really want to go back to Italy to study pizza. So that's just on my mind.
And it's hard. It would be hard to not pick Naples, Italy on that one. Cookie or pie?
I make pie for other people, but I eat cookies.
Oh, interesting. Okay, chess pie, apple pie.
Apple pie.
Apple pie.
Yes.
So you're still in New England or at base?
Absolutely. I would identify as an apple pie if that could be like an identity that I could have.
Tara lived for a long time in North Carolina and now you're in Virginia?
Yes, I'm in Northern Virginia, just outside of DC, like 45 minutes outside of DC.
Okay. Donut or bagel?
Ooh, right now I'd have to say donut, just like the fall weather, right? You need that apple cider donut is key.
Mm. Sweet or savory?
Sweet.
Sweet.
Yeah.
All right. And how about, because you told me when we talked earlier that you're a very avid reader. So novel, self-help book.
Now, currently novels. I just read all of Sally Rooney's books and I'm reading Circe right now. But 10 years ago, definitely self-help.
And maybe the last one, say you're on a desert island and you're only allowed one loaf of bread until you get rescued. What's it going to be?
Cinnamon raisin is what came to my mind. So that just must be my inner truth. Right? We have to go with our gut on these things. So.
And are you baking bread right now? Is that what I'm seeing behind you?
Yeah, I teach workshops from my kitchen here, and then I do weekend intensives with a mobile wood-fired oven at a farm nearby. But I'm prepping for a workshop. Oh, I'm gonna let my dog out. Hey, sweetie, come on. Sorry about that. Real life here. Go ahead. Okay. But yeah, I am making an apple oat rye bread. So Flower Power is my second book. It came out from Potter this summer, late August, and I'm working my way through the book in my virtual classes, and so I'm working on this apple oat rye bread. So I also added some buttery oats and toasted walnuts to it, and so I love for baking at home. I often use a large combo cooker to bake like a freeform kind of artisan style hearth loaf. But I really recommend to home bakers to invest in something called a Pullman pan. This is 9 by 4 inches. And I do a lot of sandwich style dough in these. So this is rye flour, oat flour, buckwheat flour, and it's got all kinds of fall items in it. And so once it rises to the top, I'll bake it with the lid on for 15 minutes. And so it steams the loaf. So you don't have to like put any ice in your oven or like spray down your oven with water. It just steams itself. So it's lovely. And I'll take the lid off and then finish baking it. And then I'll wrap rye breads in general. I wrap up in a cheesecloth and I kind of cure them for about 24 hours. And then you get to cut it and enjoy it. So
what does that do? What does curing it do?
Yeah, rye, if you're looking at the difference between like wheat grain and rye, I call them grains or berries or seeds kind of interchangeably, but rye has a really high level of what are called pentazans, which is just a complex sugar. And so it's really the sugars inside of the flour from the rye berry that you're hydrating when you add water to rye flour. Yeah. And so they need to set for a really long time. It's not the same as all of those nice hard proteins that you get in a wheat or a bread flour. So traditionally rye breads cure for about 24 hours because it just takes that long for the structure to not be like soft or gummy when you cut into it. So
wow, that's so interesting. So generally, I think we all think of fresh bread that you want to eat it as soon as you've baked it and not at all with rye.
Yeah, and what's wonderful is you can add like water is, we always joke, it's like a baker's gold, right? Especially if you're selling bread, if you can have a lot of water in your bread, that's good for your profit margins. But I think as we are going through this grain revival, we've also found that using freshly milled flour or regional grains, often adding more water is what's going to make it work for the dough. And so rye it can really absorb so much water. So you get this wonderful staying power, like the loaf can last for much longer than a wheat-based bread. Yeah.
So Tara, what makes a good baker?
Well, I think just attention to detail and like willingness to fail a little bit. That my failures have always been my biggest lessons. And so I think understanding that it's a journey and it's a long game, and breaking down your larger goals into achievable small steps. Bakers are always doing that, right? You've got a recipe that's, I'm going to close the window just a second. Living on a farm here.
Your dog wants to be a star.
Yes, not with the toddler and with the dog, but we're always thinking backwards. So I think understanding a large goal that you want to accomplish, breaking that down into smaller chunks, and then looking honestly at your day and figuring out where you can fit that in, and just not being over focused on your bread dough, but being mindful of it, just touching it a little bit every here and there. When you walk by, just lift the cover back and poke it and observe it. I think being willing to observe is really important, and being willing to take some risks and not be so attached to the actual like loaf that comes out of your oven. Because what I love about baking, particularly with sourdough, like I have my 100% rye starter here, is that I'm trying to sort of steward all these living organic processes, right? And be in the middle of them. And you are just one element among that. So it's important every time. You are constantly trying to get better every single loaf of bread, of course, but there's other living things going on here. And so sometimes it doesn't come out, but that doesn't mean you're a bad baker. It just means that's what happened that day. And being willing, I think as a young baker, I'd feel really, if I had a bad mix or, you know, my bake didn't come out well, you kind of take that stuff really hard as a young baker. And I think to continue on, you sort of need to accept that there's just some percentages that aren't going to work out, but that shouldn't stop you.
And I know you were Steve mentioned that you graduated from College of the Atlantic, and I know you studied, I think, art and philosophy. Have I got that right? And I'm just curious if either of those things have anything in common with what you do now.
Yeah, I very much, when I do invite people to an in-person workshop, they are curated in the sense that I really pick special locations that I think will allow people to kind of leave their stress, leave their everyday life at the door. You know, like in-person workshops are like 6 to 8 adults in places that I think are pretty unique, and having a background in installation arts. I think that I choose these sites sort of as these site-specific baking installations, if you will. So previously I was teaching sourdough summer camps at a place called Pine Mountain Settlement School in Eastern Kentucky, which was a very interesting place to bring people. And now there's a beautiful farm I could walk to from here. There's sort of these farms that our generation is trying to figure out and strategize what to do with here in Loudoun County, but it's also a special place. So I like to think about the mindset that people are going to be in when they're learning. And I think as an artist, I look at the landscape and I look at the buildings and I think, like, is this place going to encourage somebody and embolden them to, you know, go home and make really good bread? And so I love that visual part of it. And then how you feel when you're in a space is really important to me.
Yeah. And so do you have in your own kitchen that we can see? Are there ways that you set it up that somehow sort of aesthetically, not just, oh, it's organized or my flour bin is over here, but that somehow sort of encourage your mindset as a baker?
I do. I have my candle. I do have my candle lit. I always have to have a candle going. And then beyond that, I do keep a clipboard. So any recipe that I'm reading or working on, I keep either on my clipboard or I keep my book open, and I just make a center for myself. So that is a place where just the baking is happening and all the other chaos of the kitchen and the house can kind of go elsewhere. But that was a sort of purpose. While we have the butcher block countertops, I just bake right on my countertop there. It's so easy. But I do say that keeping a clean space is part of the success of baking, and just cleaning as you go, and just that mental focus is so much easier when it's not cluttered in my.
And is the candle, I'm sorry, is the candle related somehow to wood-fired baking, or what does the candle mean to you?
I think it's more like setting that intention, right? Like that's what we can do. Like we can't necessarily control every single thing that's going to happen, from putting the flour and water in the mixing bowl to taking it out of the oven. But I do like to set an intention for like what this bread will be and what I'm trying to do. And it just helps me get focused, I think, and like acknowledge like in the beginning of a time and the end to a time. And I think that's what I love so much about sourdough. It's like, I like to maintain things throughout my day to give myself a sense of time and where I'm at in my day. And I'm very much like a systems maintenance person. So I know that I do very specific things every day at the same time. And so it's like, I get my book out, I open it up, I light the candle, I weigh out my ingredients, and that candle is lit. That's like that time for that task.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I had noted something out from your book. This was actually from your previous book, A Baker's Year. But I thought it really sounded rather zen, and I'm going to read it if that's okay, and then ask you about it, which says, and you're sort of hitting on some of these same themes now as we talk. Let go of appearances, be concerned with more than just looks to achieve a bread that doesn't leave the heart bitter and the stomach empty. A respectable loaf of bread is not necessarily visually perfect. Bread should look, first and foremost, like it came from somewhere. The grain from a particular farm, the water from a certain well. Be proud of your work and understand that bread is as much a practice as it is a noun, which I love. I want to say, I love that phrase. But I'm just interested because I feel like one of the things your new book does so effectively, and I was hoping that you would talk a little about it, is balance, something that's very technically challenging, certainly for me, baking sourdough, with kind of almost a sort of Zen spiritual side. So I wonder if you feel that and how you think about that.
Yeah, I did have a career in the arts before bread kind of took over everything, and I did installation art. I made sculpture, and was able to travel to Japan and have shows. But what I took away from the studio practice into my bread making is that I think something is just my opinion, something I think we collectively are looking for when we engage with a craft, right? When we decide we're going to start our sourdough starter, or it could be when you decide you want to build a canoe, or whatever it is, decision that you've made. We're looking for an entry point into that. And I think that it's, I'm losing my train of thought here, but can you ask your question one more?
Yes. So I was asking about the fact that you have like a very clear technical expertise. And if you're reading one of your cookbooks, a lot of technique, and then at the same time, almost a little bit of a practice as
Right.
though, yes.
Yes, because I do think, thank you for that. I do think
course.
it's first and foremost like a physical practice. So when you're learning something new, like say your sourdough, or my father-in-law is building a boat in the barn, so that's why I'm like pointing in that direction about the canoe. But any of these things, it's very important to accept that you're going to be learning over time, and that it is a process. And I was mostly a process-based artist. And I think that's directly translated into the way that I approach the bread, not in the singular loaf, but in the overall process of making it.
Yeah.
And that's where I find a lot of the joy. And it is so much a physical experience that I always tell people, when we don't have the physical confidence, we can get really caught up in like, do I need things to be this exact temperature, or do I have to mix it at this exact time? And we're sort of looking for some kind of scaffolding to hang on to. And that's really important. But I think it's also just as important to remember that we need to be flexible with bread, because it is like a living, it is a living thing that we're working with.
Yeah. And I sort of had a similar question about you. You have a style that's, just very, I think you said non-chefy to me, very artisanal and really sort of relaxed and rustic and simple. But at the same time, you're quite adept at Instagram and videos and social media. And I wondered if those two things ever feel, at war with each other in any way, or how those two things fit together.
I think I really lucked out, honestly, Peggy, because I love creating media. And so that is a direct, creative. What I was going to say earlier was, trying to be in the flow state was what I'm remembering now. But I think having made, media for so long as an artist, when it came to my bread making, it just felt really natural to be taking photos. It felt really natural to be writing about my experience. And I feel lucky in that sense, because I know that social media and the pressure to be posting and the pressure to be always kind of doing everything online, creating content, is really unenjoyable for a lot of people.
Yeah.
But I have, from a very young age, I liked being on the other side of the camera and doing this, creating media.
And you said something very interesting to me when you said when you first, I think it was a friend, showed you Instagram. So this must have been a while ago. You instantly knew, like, so what was it? How did you know, like, this interests me?
I just, being a visual person, like the idea that everybody was either like doing Facebook or Twitter at the time. So it was just a lot of words, which as an author, I appreciate as well. But I was still doing like more visual arts at that time in my life. And so the idea that I could just take a photo that was going to encapsulate like a feeling, and I, at the very beginning, and I still do, will put like a pop music quote underneath the photo to just kind of create like a vibe. Mm-hmm. And I loved that. I love being able to share the image rather than having to talk so much about it. But I do go pretty lengthy into my captions late at night sometimes. So.
And how do you balance all, you write very beautifully, you're baking, you have clearly a very strong aesthetic. Do you say, today is my writing day and today is my baking day, or how do you juggle those different aspects of your career?
Before having a child, I had very specific days of the week that were devoted. And now every day is a little different, and it's more like times of the day that I do things. And so I am I'm with my daughter most of the time. Currently she's 2.5, so she's not really in school. But my day is a lot of mothering at this point, and making bread around that. But I do have like times of the day that I will get things done by. So I have my own little micro schedule each day, yeah. But my life is more day to day now than it ever has been, which is hilarious to me, but here we are.
And I want you to share, this was something that was in the profile that we ran of you on Sunday, but I loved it. Tell me about your daughter's middle name.
Yes, so her middle name is Rye. We actually have a bag of rye on the porch here. We're tilling up, we're taking a meadow into a 1/2 acre tilled bed for growing grain in our backyard right now. So we've got Rye on the porch, but we wanted to put Rye in her name because rye is a very tenacious plant, and it can grow in adverse conditions. And we had her right at the beginning of the pandemic. And we just thought, wow, she's going to need a little spunk, and she sure has it. So appropriately named. Rye can often be described as like a peppery or kind of spicy flavor to the flour. And so she's going to be just fine.
And I'm wondering, like, I read something on Instagram that you called yourself a recovering perfectionist. So since we're talking about being a parent, are those things related? And tell us a little bit more about what you mean.
Yeah, to be totally frank, I was working on the book, and was only a month into the writing the manuscript and doing the recipe testing when I had my daughter. So it was quite convenient because she slept a lot in the beginning. So there's lots of bread baking and writing going on early. And I remember one morning, like the bread wasn't coming out, I was burning it, or the volume didn't rise as much as I wanted it to. And I remember chucking it off my back porch and kind of grumbling and looking over at her, kind of watching me. And I mean, honestly, she's probably asleep, but it profoundly impacted me to recognize the way that some of the attitudes within the restaurant or baking industry had affected me, and that if I was going to go forward with this craft and also like grow into motherhood, like I really needed to let go of some of those expectations. And I think that that's also why I encourage people to embrace the process, because I think that that's where the health benefits lie, is just having a craft in your life. And I didn't think of myself as a perfectionist because I had so many, my friends are interesting people to know in the food world. And so I didn't think I had some of those same tendencies, but you see yourself reflected, in your family and your children and your friends. And so I knew then I just had to let go of some of those expectations and just embrace like whatever was coming out of the oven and learn from it and move on. So,
And you really do get, because when I look at your book, they just all look so beautiful. Do you really ever make a loaf that doesn't look as gorgeous as all of these?
It's not often, but I do. My husband always jokes that he's going to start like an alternative Instagram that's like, food that I like to eat, or all my burn bread or all my flat bread, but he's too kind for that. But yeah.
And I'm wondering, I mean, it just feels like such a, when I was, say back in it feels like such a golden age of bread right now, both in, certainly in Maine, we have some just wonderful grains and some beautiful bakeries and beautiful breads, and also really all over the US. So, do we need to make it? Couldn't we just go out and buy a loaf?
I mean, I think if you're looking for something in your life, like if you feel that there's something not quite right in your life or something is missing, you should definitely be baking bread at home. But I think if you're good with how you're spending your time and your life looks the way that you want it to, the best thing that you can do is support other people that have chosen it as a life path. So yeah. Absolutely. We had talked about some wonderful bakeries in Maine, and it's just a burgeoning scene in New England in general. So it is always good if you can to support the people that are in the bakeries day in, day out, or the millers, the farmers. There's so much to support that I do think it's okay if you don't make, your bread for your sandwich, right? It takes a village. So.
And now you had a bakery, Smoke Signals, which tell me about how long you did that, and tell us a little bit about that bakery and why you have sort of switched into education and cookbook writing.
Yeah, I moved from Vermont to Asheville, North Carolina in the early 2000s. And I started a bakery there called Smoke Signals because I was using, at the time I had a greenhouse that was heated with a wood stove, a cabin that was heated with a wood stove, and a Allen Scott wood-fired oven. So I would walk around the property and just see all these smokestacks. So that's where the name came from. But I had the bakery for about 5 or 6 years. And it was just everything that I could do with my bare hands. So I did have apprentices that would come and stay at the bakery. Traveling bakers love to come by and help out. I did have like people coming in and helping me a little bit in like the holiday season, but primarily like I chopped all the firewood, lit the ovens, took care of the ovens, made the bread dough, packed it up, went to the farmer's market, had a very small wholesale, and was just kind of doing it all. And I enjoyed it. I was very much living out like sort of a monastic dream. I like growing up in Maine. I don't know if it was just very beautiful memories of the pine forest and just like feeling very close to something there. And I've always been intrigued by a monastic lifestyle. So I really got to live that for a couple of years there. But as you can see, I'm really chatty. And so I opened up the bakery to have a couple pie classes in the fall. And it just caught my attention how much I enjoyed it. And it felt like what I love doing now is trying to connect people at home, our home bakers, with the professional or industrial side and be a bridge, because I have been able to be privy and witness to so many interesting conversations happening as these new grain economies have been going or getting off the ground in the past decade. But yet my life has changed and I am mostly at home with my child now, and figuring out sort of the next steps. And so I love to be a bridge between these two worlds, so we can talk about why does a bag of flour cost $9, or why does your loaf of bread cost $10, and allow just a more fluid conversation between sometimes these worlds that need to be, but can be really disjointed.
So since you've just brought those up, let's answer them.
Yeah.
Why $9 for flour or $10 for a loaf of bread?
I think it just has to do with everybody sort of tying their boats together. That's how I think about it. So when you have a commodity wheat that's being subsidized and it's being grown on a large scale, and it's going to, say, a very large mill that's going to blend different grains from different farmers together to get certain protein specifications. And then, the flour is refined, it becomes shelf stable, and, they're being able to sell it at a low price because there's costs kind of cut at each point in that process. But for example, flour that I get flour from a lot of different places, but just I'll shout out to like Maine Grains or Carolina Grounds. Everyone is taking a risk together in that scenario. The miller and the farmer are deciding on prices for the crop, right? And then there's going to be like different agricultural years. And so making sure that the farmer is being paid an equitable wage for their grain is really important. And that cost doesn't show up in a lot of supermarket flour. And then making sure that the craft of milling is respected and the miller's time and ingenuity is also factored into that cost. And then especially when you use freshly milled stone ground flour, you're just getting terroir, you're getting like the freshest of the fresh, and it really is like a premium product. And I wish it was just what we knew, but for myself, I blend a lot of flours together, and you'll see that in Flour Power. I blend a lot of, say, the commodity wheat or the roller milled flour from like maybe a place like King Arthur, which I think is a great brand, and I use their flour constantly. And then I bring in flour from Mills Stone Ground that is fresh and that I'm really excited about. So I think it is, like I said, sort of these professional bakers and home bakers. I think I also like to encourage discourse between, freshly milled stone ground flour and flour from the supermarket, which I know you can find, of course, freshly milled flour in some supermarkets, but I'm just meaning like a generic market.
And you mill some of if you're growing, you said you have a bag of rye out front. So you mill your own flour too, I take it.
Yeah, I have a few different, what I call tabletop mills. So this one here is called the Como, and this is the one that I like the most. The mock mill, which is over there, which you can't see, it's a lower price point, but it's the same machinery inside. So it's just, you're really paying for like the aesthetics, but this one is quite beautiful. And it's really simple. So if I get berries, wheat or rye or barley or whatever it is, I don't keep the berries in the freezer, but I do keep them in a cool, dark place. When I freshly mill flour, here on my mill, or if I purchase it, I do keep the freshly milled flour in the freezer because it does have the germ, so it's perishable. And so, yeah, it's super great. You can adjust the hopper here, and when the stone, so there's 2 stones inside, the grain will go down through the center and travel over those stones and fall down the side and come out this chute here. And it's a little loud, so I won't turn it on unless you want me to. But with the stones further apart, you can just crack grain or make grits. And then with the stones further together, you can actually make a really lovely flour. And
you can taste that when you bake a bread with that. Can you taste that?
I believe that you can, because if you think about, I think about the wheat berry the way you might think about an egg. So you've got 3 major parts to the wheat berry: the germ, which is like the yolk of an egg. That's the embryonic heart of the wheat berry, but it's also just a storehouse for fats and oils. And there's like a perfume and an aroma and a real flavor from the germ inside the wheat berry. And then you've got the endosperm of the wheat berry, which is similar to the whites of an egg. And then you've got the bran of the wheat berry, which is obviously similar to the shell of an egg. And when you have that germ, you're basically taking this beautiful oil and you're smearing it throughout the whole flour. So that's the thing with freshly milled stone-ground flour. It's always going to have the germ in it, so it's always going to be perishable, but that germ like definitely translates to a creaminess. I'm like getting really excited about it, but it's so creamy. It's so creamy, and you notice it. Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you a little bit about cookbooks. Do you read other people's cookbooks?
It depends on if I'm writing one or not. If I'm in the process of writing a book, I will like just go on a cookbook fast, and I try not to consume too much media or even follow, I'll like follow and unfollow folks. I just don't want to be like too influenced. And then in the interim, I've just, all of it for sure. There's always like a list of books coming in.
When you wrote this newest book, Flower Power, did you feel like there was, some niche or something that you wanted to do that you hadn't seen out there?
The DESM starter in here. So the book goes from like a classic white style sourdough culture, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, like just a bubbly, loose batter. And the center of the book is all about DESM, which I learned from my mentor, Jennifer Lapidus. And it's a stiff whole grain starter, and it cultivates more yeast than it does lactic acid bacteria. So it doesn't create so much of a tang in your bread dough. And people that are using freshly milled flour, or folks that are interested in tasting the flavor of the flour rather than the flavor that the lactic acid bacteria are creating in the dough, will use this kind of starter. She learned it from her mentor, Alan Scott. And so it just seemed like something that I think I say that, a sourdough starter can sort of carry a life on in time through all these little moments. And so it felt important to me to just bring that to the forefront a little bit, because I don't see people using that very often or thinking about sourdough in a very broad term. Yeah.
When you're working on a cookbook, do you know all the recipes? I mean, are you writing the recipes as you're working on it, or you have all the recipes and you're kind of just writing them down?
For this book, I had the names of everything. So it's almost like naming all your paintings and then painting them or something. I had a name for each bread, and I had a concept behind each one. And then I would write the recipe, test it, make notes, refine it. And then it went to my friend, Kia Mastriani. She's got a milk glass pie in Shelby, North Carolina. She's on a farm with her husband, and she tested everything. So she would test it. If it didn't work, she'd try it again just to make sure that it wasn't, bad weather day or something. She'd give me feedback, we'd alter it, she'd test it for a final time, and then it would be checked off.
And
So
did you have any
on a conversation.
Did you have any ideas where like you had a concept in your head and then you just couldn't get it to work?
There was so much, it was like every day there was like 4 or 5 breads going on. And so I do remember I wanted a bread that was like mostly sesame seeds, like just basically sesame seed, as many sesame seeds as you could get into the dough without, right, collapsing it. But that one just had to get tabled. It was like, okay, well, we'll just come back to that one. But
And speaking of coming back, do you have a new cookbook that you're thinking about?
I am. I really like to expand further, like go past bread. So a lot of my career, although I got my start in bread bakeries, does involve croissant making, laminated pastry, puff pastry. I'm not a cake baker per se, but I do have a sweet tooth. So I do have a repertoire of pies and bars and cookies and stuff like that. And of course, like pizza is a huge part of what I love and do. And so at my bakery, we always had a pizza night every month, and I love making pizza for my family and friends. So I'd like the next book to be sort of expanding on what I call the naturally leavened kitchen, if you will.
Yeah. And I think I may take a few questions from the audience. Are you?
Sounds great.
All right. So you mentioned you learned from your failures. Can you talk about a specific failure?
Let me think on that. I always say whatever you think of first is the right one. A specific failure. I was having, ironically enough, I was having trouble figuring out the right amount of dough to go into my Pullman pans for 100% rye loaf. And it just, like over and over, I was baking these loaves of bread, but they just were not rising to the top until, and that's the kind of thing where I'm like, it helps to not bake alone, although I do love it as a solitary craft. I started talking to other people, and there wasn't actually anything wrong with the formula. It just needed to be increased to meet the pan size. And sometimes when we're working alone, we're just have our blinders on. So it's always helpful, which is what's so great about Instagram and communities like the folks around Maine Grain, is that you can ask these questions. And it's sometimes, I always say it's a very small problem. Probably if you're struggling with your bread, it's probably not the whole thing that's going wrong. It's probably just something very small that's hard for you to see because you're in it. So
who gets to eat your failures?
Yes. Yeah.
Someone is asking if you've baked with mesquite flour and what you thought of it, if you have.
I have my friend Mary Denham. She's a pastry chef in San Francisco. She does pop-ups called Bloom's End, and she's young and psychedelic and is just doing the most innovative things, I think. And she introduced me to mesquite flour, and we use it, and she uses it to make like in a graham cracker application, and it's so delicious. Yeah.
And
with it.
Why do you use a digital thermometer with your starter?
Yeah, I like to just know what the temperature of everything is. For me, that's more information to make an educated guess, like, can this wait out on the countertop for another hour? Well, I give Violet a bath and we read some books, or do I need to put it right in? And so temperature, as a home baker, our kitchens are so variable, right? Like my front door is always being opened, or the dogs are coming in and out, or whatever. It's really hard to control fermentation in a kitchen like this that has so many variables going on. So I fixate on the temperature because it's something that gives me information that then I can make the next best choice. And that's really just what bread making is. It's like at each juncture, you're making the next best choice for the next step. So for things like, and then of course, different things are happening in your dough or your starter at different temperature zones. So a warmer temperature zone for my liquid style sourdough culture is going to create a lot of lactic acid bacteria. So it's going to create a more pungent or punchy flavor to the starter, and then the bread that's made with it. But for example, the Daism starter, because we're actually trying to not have so much lactic acid bacteria in the starter itself, because we want to taste the flavor of the flour. It's pretty important that that starter stays like below 60 degrees, sometimes 58 degrees. So I actually just ordered like a 6-bottle wine cooler for my countertop, so I can program like cooler temperatures.
Oh,
So
interesting.
it's
A
just
wine cooler for your bread. I love it. Was that your own idea, or did you hear about that somewhere?
It's been a home baker hack for a while. We all are I haven't ordered like a proof box for myself, but I'll use like a igloo cooler with like a heating pad in it. So I was trying to figure out how to control a small space in a certain temperature for things to ferment correctly. So yeah.
And I'm throwing in my own question here, but I'm thinking that you have much of your career has been cooking in the South, but we're up here in the North. Any special suggestions for likely being in a much colder kitchen than yours?
Yeah, absolutely. You can take like a Playmate cooler, like a big cooler that you would go to like the lake or the beach with, and line it with a heating pad and a towel or like a blanket, and close the lid and let it warm up. And I use that as a proofing chamber all winter long. I keep it in the laundry room, like on top of my dryer, and my starters go in there if they need to warm up. And then I'll put my dough in there to ferment. I'll put shaped loaves in there, covered with a shower cap to do the proofing. But this is the first time in my adult life I don't have a wood stove in my home. So even though I'm here in the South, I very much share your struggles with trying to keep things warm in the winter. So rather than, of course, trying to heat your whole house, just having a chamber that you can keep pretty warm. Or I'll take a crock pot, like a crock. Not that you would make like a super stew in, but like an actual crock.
Yeah.
I'll line that with the heating pad and just drop my starter in there overnight as like a little incubator.
Someone is asking, can you talk about timing and how attentive you have to be when it comes to letting the bread dough rise at various points?
Yeah, I encourage people to, after you've read through the recipe, I'm a notepad person. So I have like a yellow legal pad going all the time, and just write down the key times. So say, okay, I'm going to feed my starter at 9 o'clock the night before I mix my bread dough. I'm going to mix that bread dough at 9. Then I'm going to come back and do a series of folds like every hour. And so you can kind of come and go, you know what time you need to be there with your bread, but then you're enjoying, checking the mail or having breakfast or whatever in between. And so it does give you a little freedom. And just know that I think the biggest thing for baking at home is, even if it's my recipe or somebody else's, you don't want to move on to the next step until you feel really confident that your bread dough is like pillowy and full of air. So you've mixed your bread dough, it's fermenting in your bowl, and then don't shape it or don't put it in the fridge until it feels like a pillow. And then once you've shaped it, whether it goes into a basket or a pan, don't put it in the oven until it's like doubled in size and feels like a pillow again. Because I think we can get really caught up on like, okay, it says proof it for 2 hours or let it rise for 2 hours. And folks, of course, are doing exactly that. But if you really want to take your bread to the next level, sometimes just let it go. And it is going to be different than the book says. But the recipes, the way I think about it, and this is kind of could be a philosophical argument, but I tend to think a recipe is a suggestion. It's a stepping off point. So these are the main times that you want to be hitting. But everybody's kitchen is going to be so different. So just having a little patience until it should just feel so filled with air at each step.
Here's an audience person, Rebecca Bell, who wants to know, please explain simply the whole discard and feeding regimen, excuse me.
Yeah, so I keep my starters in the fridge most of the time. And what I encourage folks to do is to bring out your starter we're assuming you want to bake on the weekends. You want to mix your bread dough Saturday morning and you want your bread to come out of the oven on Sunday. I encourage folks to do what's called a maintenance refresh on Wednesdays. So Wednesday, after I brush my teeth in the morning, this is true, I make sure to just refresh my starters. So it's always nice to attach it to something else. You're like, already do it. It could be your coffee or tea, but remove it from the fridge. And then I'm going to discard most of what's here. And that's your discard. So what you pull off from the starter, if it looks good, smells good, tastes good, you could put that in something if you chose to. You could also feel free to compost it, but you'll just reduce it to a small amount. And I call that like your VIP crowd. And then you give this select group of yeast and bacteria tons more flour and water. Let it sit on your countertop for a couple of hours and put it back in the fridge. And what that maintenance refreshment does is it balances the acidity in your starter so that when you take it out at 9 p.m. on Friday night, you can see how late I stay up. It's 9. But when you take your starter out at 9 p.m. on Friday night, you'll do the exact same thing. You'll discard the majority of it and feed that select group of yeast and lactic acid bacteria more food and water. And then it will ferment on your countertop overnight. And then you'll be able to use that in your bread dough the next day. If you skip the maintenance refreshing, what will happen, the yeast in your sourdough culture is going to create some alcohol, and it's just lighter than the batter, so it floats to the top, and it really can wig folks out because it's called the hooch, and it's just kind of a gross layer, and it can be different colors. It can be grayish or yellowish or brown. That's all fine. If you see anything pink or orange, toss it. But other than that, it can probably be brought back to life. But if you give it that little boost in the middle of the week, then it's less of a headache when you pull it out on Friday. It should be ready to go Saturday morning, no problem.
And I just want to add that your book, Flour Power, has a bunch of recipes also for what to do with that discard, things you might bake with that.
Absolutely.
Chocolate chip cookies and banana bread, just to name two that I can recall off the top of my head.
Yeah, I like in that sense, the midweek discard, or really any discard, it's nice to use that as a flavoring agent. So in a pie crust or a cookie, it's just going to give it like a cultured flavor to it.
Yeah, and that is the first time I've ever seen a recipe for sourdough pie crust. I was super intrigued by that.
It's really so great. Yeah, I'm sorry. I love pie. I'm getting ready to, we're gonna be deep in pies here pretty soon. So
showing your Maine roots.
Yes. Yeah.
Someone is asking, what is the longest you can leave a much neglected sourdough starter in the fridge and then successfully revive it?
3 months.
Probably
6 months.
Asking for a friend.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've been there. For myself personally, I think the longest I've let a sourdough culture go in the fridge is 6 months. But the issue then is, like, if you think about you're just more and more acidity is being built up over time in the fridge. And so when you take it out and you want to use it, it's not necessarily like the yeast and the bacteria kind of go dormant in your fridge. So it's slow. They're not just going to die off. As a tangent, the times I've actually been really worried about killing my sourdough starter is in a high temperature. Like if it's in your car for too long on a summer day, or I went to the beach and I forgot my starter in the trunk. And that's more of a temperature zone where I'm nervous about killing off the microbes, like basically just cooking the starter informally. Your fridge, yeah.
Why is your sourdough starter in the trunk of your car?
Oh, I was baking at the beach, of course.
Okay.
My idea of the vacation is like obviously not right. Take work with you, but in the fridge, it's not that it's going to die, but it's just going to become so much work after 3 months, 4 months, 6 months to get it back to where it was, that sometimes you just might have better results, like starting one from scratch. I say in the book that it takes about 14 days, but truthfully, it's about a week before you have a starter. So it's a little bit of something that you have to do every day. And then I'll grab just real quick. If I no, I'm not going to use my starter. It's like whatever is going on. We recently moved to the area, so there's always baking going on, but I will dehydrate it. So I'll just smear my starter out onto a sheet pan. I'll add a little warm water to it so it's spreadable, and I'll use a flexible plastic spatula, smear it onto parchment paper on a sheet pan, and pop it in my oven with just the light on and leave it for 24 hours. And then you get dehydrated flakes, and it's wonderful. You can travel with these, you can gift them to people.
Wow.
And then rather than letting it become really acidic and kind of questionable next to your pickle jar in the fridge, you just take a portion of this and feed it flour and water when you're ready to start again.
And that keeps indefinitely, I assume.
Yeah.
Somebody is asking your favorite everyday bread, and is the recipe in your book?
We eat so much of the work week bread here at our house. It's a super flexible dough. It goes in the Pullman pan. It blends freshly milled flour and roller milled flour together. And it's just, we kind of have always a little bit of it going on in the background. That's an easy one to use. Like you can switch it into pizza dough. So if you want to make pizza on a weeknight, but the work week bread is pretty much our staple right now. Yeah.
And somebody is asking if you could explain a little bit more about how the desum, I don't know how to pronounce it. Say it one more time.
Desum.
Desum process differs from using the more liquid process.
Yeah, so it's just very stiff. So the ratios on a classic like white flour sourdough starter that I would start with, say a beautiful like King Arthur organic bread flour. I'll do 100 grams. I think of everything in grams, but 100 grams of the King Arthur organic white bread flour, 100 grams of warm water, and that's going to create like a really lactic acid bacteria friendly environment. And you're going to have like 1 part yeast to 100 parts lactic acid bacteria. So you can really see why thyme is an ingredient in sourdough bread, because we're using the sourdough for a culturing aspect to the flour. We're transforming the flour by having the lactic acid bacteria kind of work on it as it's fermenting. And the yeast is fewer, so we need more time for it to rise to our expectations. Something like the desum starter, it's stiffer, so there's less water, and that's about 100 grams of freshly milled whole grain, like whole wheat flour, and maybe 60 grams of water. So you can't really stir it with a spoon. You have to knead it into a very stiff ball. It's less sour. It encourages more of a yeast profile, and it takes longer to ferment. So that's nice for the baker. And so you get a little bit more yeast. I think of it as my yeast ball versus something with the creamy white sourdough that's going to be more of a that classic sourdough flavor to the bread.
We clearly have a lot of bakers here. I think we're just about out of time. I'll throw in one more question, but all our questions are very, sound like people who are doing a lot of baking themselves. So this one is asking if you can freeze starter, excuse me. You just showed us how to dehydrate it, but.
You can. I've been experimenting with my freezer a lot this fall, just for fun, just to see. I've fully proofed a loaf of bread and frozen it and baked it the next day, and it was kind of great. So I'm excited to explore.
Wow. So you froze the loaf, not just the starter.
Yeah, and you can. I froze it like just in the basket just to see, and I baked it the next morning. It was great. I just couldn't get to it. I had to get Violet from school. I just put it in the freezer.
And did you bake it from frozen?
I did.
Did you thaw it, or you baked it from frozen?
It was great. So
wow.
Look, that's next, right? How we can use our freezers. But you can, what I do with the starter, if I'm going to freeze it, I just put it into a little, portion it out into cups, and then make sure they're secured and tight, and I just freeze it that way. But you can freeze it, and then I thaw it in the fridge first before bringing it out to room temperature. So I just pull it out of the freezer and pop it in the fridge.
I think we are out of time, but we're clearly all going to have to take one of your classes because there's still a lot more questions, and it feels sourdough seems sort of an endless. You don't come to the end of learning things with sourdough. I have the sense.
It is. Do you mind if I read a quote real quick?
No, I'd love you to.
And my daughter's here, so she'll come over. But hey, babe, you can come over. Yeah. Okay. So this is from one of my favorite books called How to Cook a Wolf.
Hi.
Hey, babe. She's my taste tester. Say hi to everybody. Okay. Mommy's going to read a quote. So, yeah, thank you. Oh, okay. Thank you, everybody, for your time tonight. And so this is from a chapter on making bread. And it says, "It does not cost much. It is pleasant, one of those almost hypnotic businesses like a dance from some ancient ceremony. It leaves you filled with peace and the house filled with one of the world's sweetest smells. But it takes a lot of time. If you can find that, the rest is easy. And if you cannot rightly find it, make it. For probably there is no chiropractic treatment, no yoga exercise, or no hour of meditation in a music throbbing chapel that will leave you emptier of bad thoughts than making bread."
That's lovely. Thank you. Thank you so much, Tara.
Yeah.
It's a pleasure talking to you. And someone's saying they need info on her classes. So why don't you tell us your website?
Yeah, my website is Tara E. Jensen. My last name, my middle name is Elizabeth. So taraejensen.com. I have a slew of virtual classes and also more intimate in-person classes with my wood-fired oven, all the way listed through March. So, and you can find me at Baker Hands on Instagram. And I love to troubleshoot with people and get pictures of your bread and just help people get to making the bread that they want at home.
And just a little plug for Tara's book, but it looks like it's coming out backwards here, Flour Power, because it has a ton of information that if you can't get to one of those classes, that will help you if you're starting sourdough.
Awesome.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, everyone.